So let's now fast forward to some drug studies. This statement in this paper published in 1984 really summarizes the literature up to 1984. Cholesterol lowering trials had failed. 1984, at that time, now decades of studies, there really wasn't good evidence that you could lower cholesterol and people would be healthier, people live longer, have less heart attacks. This was the biggest study ever on record. 500,000 men were studied here. So what you've got is blood samples from almost 500,000 men, and you're getting the men that had the highest cholesterol. So only the top 5% averaging 290 total cholesterol, and only those that had at least 190 in LDL. So that is extremely high, about twice as much as the American Heart Association now recommends. Those were the men included in the study. So they were at extremely high risk of dying from heart disease. So they were treated with rather primitive drug, cholestyramine, which is a bile sequestering agent. Could make basically a person feel really ill, gastrointestinal disease, disorder, but it does lower cholesterol significantly. And so this is a very long trial, 7.4 years, and you got men with lower cholesterol compared to men who were given placebo. This was the breakthrough people needed. This was the first trial that actually showed that less people would die as a result of cholesterol reduction. And this is cut and paste right from the study. Cholestyramine group experienced a 24% reduction in death from coronary heart disease. But what's also in the paper, and this is a cut and paste directly from their results, the risk of death was not reduced in the cholestyramine group. So you've got a 24% reduction in death from heart attacks, and yet the cholestyramine people are not living longer. How is that possible? So we look at the data. It's always important to look at the data. I'm showing you the data in the study. But instead of looking at the number of deaths, what I'm looking at is the percent of people that did not have an adverse event. An adverse event, for example, being death. Okay? So if you didn't die, okay, then therefore that would be here in survival. Those people that survived, which as you can see, pretty much identical. And so you're looking at each different event, the percent of people that did not have an event, such as dying of coronary heart disease. And this is like a Where's Waldo kind of thing, okay? Someone, I dare you, challenge you to find a 24% reduction in anything. And that 24% reduction is right there. This microscopic difference right there. Now what you got, 500,000 men get the 3,800 that have the highest level of cholesterol. Half get placebo, half get drug. The drug people have reduced levels of cholesterol. In the end, the difference was 8 men across those two groups. That's 0.4% in the percent of people who died. But it's 24%, which is reported in the paper. How can you take 0.4% and then report it as 24%? Well, this is what we call relative risk. In relative risk, you can amplify minuscule effects, near zero effects, and they become very large effects. Like, this is an extraordinary manipulation of the data. It's sort of like statistical alchemy. Turn lead into gold with the data. You take the 0.4%, that's right there between the two death rates, divided by one of those reported data, the one which is the 1.6%, which actually wasn't even a correct way to do it. But you take the 0.4 divided by 1.6, and what do you get? 24%. You have now created an improvement in outcome from essentially nothing. And this was not statistically significant. This was an effect, again, I want to emphasize, was not statistically significant, but reported as a 24% change. This trial failed. It was another trial that absolutely failed at lowering cholesterol and looking at outcomes. The director really should have said, listen, we have tried. It's been decades, and we keep failing. Lowering cholesterol is just simply not helping. And what did they do? They declared victory. The director of the study said this is a turning point in cholesterol heart disease research. We now can cure cholesterol. That's in this article. All we have to do is lower cholesterol and people don't die. They also added that cholestyramine has a lot of adverse side effects, difficult to take. So what we need is medication. We need something better than cholestyramine because we're right on the way. We are curing people of heart disease, but we need something more efficient than cholestyramine. And that more efficient drug is statins. So we've now entered the statin era, controlling cholesterol with statins. So let's look at the statin trials. And of course, everybody calls it the wonder drugs. Statins have huge effects. Lipitor, reduce the risk of heart attack by 36%. And this is a very important ad, and this study was very important because it was this Lipitor study that propelled Lipitor now to be generating over $100 billion in revenue. So let's look at the Lipitor study. And it's right here. Again, it's a Where's Waldo kind of thing. This is the study that showed a 36% reduction in events, in risk from heart disease. And again, I'm showing you the percent of people that did not have an adverse effect. Because this is really what you want to do. You go to your doctor and you say, well, my cholesterol is 300. What's the likelihood that I will not have a heart attack, that I will not die? Well, that answer is right here. The percent of people that did not have an adverse event, and again, placebo and experimental groups are virtually identical in their outcomes. So where is that 36% reduction in the risk of heart disease? It's right there. That sliver of a difference is a 36% reduction. That is what you saw in the ad. And so in fact, what they had to do was combine the absence of a non-fatal heart attack plus fatal heart attacks to be able to achieve statistical significance. Either one alone was not significant. So, I'm looking around the room and I get the same look I get from cardiologists, which is kind of like this little guy. The little guy is saying, come on, seriously, I wasn't born yesterday. Are you telling me this is it? That was a 36% difference? You telling me this? So there's no tooth fairy, there's no Santa Claus, and statins aren't wonder drugs. That's what I'm telling you. So how do you get 36% out of that? It's the same game they were playing in 1984. So let's look at the real data. The real data you find is in actually a 1.1% in this particular manipulation, this particular observation. The difference between placebo and the drug, the Lipitor, is about 1.1%. What that means is if you go to the doctor and say, if I take the Lipitor, what's the likelihood I won't have either heart attack or death from a heart attack? Well, with the Lipitor, 98%. And then you say, well, what if I do nothing? Well, your likelihood of having neither is 97%. Those are pretty good odds. If you do nothing, you have a 97% chance of not having a heart attack. So the real difference is 1%. But the ad said 36%. So they're promoting this as a 36%, but I just showed you 1%. Well, did anyone notice in the ad, this little part down here? Let's expand that blue font on the blue background. This means in the clinical trial, 3% taking the sugar pill or placebo had a heart attack compared to 2% taking the Lipitor. I'm sure it's the lawyers that had them put that part in right there, right? So they're telling you the real difference is 1%. You have 1% difference, 1 point difference. That means for every 100 people prescribed Lipitor, only one person will have one less heart attack. It will have no effect in 99 out of 100 people. And again, how do you get 36%? You take the 1.1%, which is the difference, divided by the difference of the placebo between 100 and 97. Why? Who cares? It doesn't matter. This is just a way to amplify your findings. And so you take the 3% on the placebo side that had the heart attack, 1.1 divided by 3 is 36%. And that's how you sell this. You sell it to physicians, you sell it to the public by saying these are wonder drugs, that they will reduce risk in such a high percentage of the population. But it makes a difference in about 1% of the population. So if you actually had truth in advertising, I mean, imagine that. The real number is 1%. So if you actually had an ad that was accurate, that said Lipitor reduces the risk of heart attack by 1%, how many people would take it? Especially as we talk later about the adverse effects. Now, another trial, and I have heard about Jupiter so much. The thing about the Jupiter trial was you had relatively healthy people, primary prevention, but these are people who have high inflammation, high CRP. And that's another thing statins do, is they can reduce inflammation. And so there was this phenomenal study, New England Journal of Medicine, and you see what the director of the study, John Castelline, said. It's spectacular. We have evidence that a statin prevents a first heart attack. Steve Nissen, director of the Cleveland Clinic, cardiology, Cleveland Clinic. It's breathtaking. It's a blockbuster. It's paradigm shifting. It's like he's talking about the next, Bruce Willis, Die Harder, Die Harder 47. This is the greatest thing that ever happened. It is a blockbuster. So we are looking for great effects from the Jupiter study. Well, even though I'm not an MD, I often do take the CME courses to see how the statin effects are presented to MDs. So this is from a CME course given to doctors. So this is a slide on the Jupiter effect on the benefit, which looks really impressive. 44% reduction in events in these relatively healthy people. So let's look a little closer at this. The study was actually terminated at 1.9 years. I mean, almost nobody is in the study out after 2 years. So all the data to the right of 1.9 years don't count. So we stopped the graph, really. This is when the study was finished. That is the 44% effect. Now look at the scale. I want to show you how we are deceived. The actual scale, if everybody had a heart attack, it would be 1.0. So this scale goes up to 1.0 if there's a high rate of heart attacks. Notice this scale doesn't even go to 0.1. So you are looking at a fraction of the actual data. Brace yourselves. I'm now going to show you, this is cut and paste, this is not my graph. I'm going to show you the graph directly out of the New England Journal of Medicine showing the same data for those two lines. That's it. I'm serious about this. This is like a magician, that right in front of you can do magic and you don't notice it. They are doing this right in front of you. They are not committing fraud. I never accuse pharma or the people who publish work of fraud. They're doing this right in front of you. Those are two lines. And right there is a 44%. Now, how is that a 44% difference? Because there were almost no effects. Only about 0.7% of the placebo group had any event. And about 0.4% of the people given Crestor had an event. When you look at 0.7 down to 0.4, that's a 44% reduction. But the real difference was about 0.3% benefit. So this is deception at the highest level. It's deception right before your eyes. And I just want to remind you what Steve Nissen said. I just can't get past this. Steve Nissen somehow, very well paid by pharma, very well supported in his research and personally by pharma, can somehow look at that and call it breathtaking. I think it's important to see this. It's important to name names, to call people out. This is ridiculous. I mean, these are the people who are in a position of authority. These are the people who make the cholesterol guidelines. These are people very well paid by pharma who are looking at a finding like that and now promoting Crestor, which, again, is now generating billions in revenue for its company.